Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and creepy horror stories from Reddit. First story. This story was shared by you/Nickmandel. Something in the Charles River. Urban legends are my shit. When I was a kid I could never get enough of the fuzzy Bigfoot sightings, those garbage photos of the Loch Ness Monster, that kind of stuff. The older I got, the further down the rabbit hole I dove. Got really into old myths from all sorts of places. The Japanese ones were usually my favorites. Eastern myths in general can get particularly brutal. I'm from Boston, born and raised. Well, born in Cambridge, raised in Boston. Close enough. As you probably know, we've got our fair share of urban legends here in Massachusetts. All sorts of ghosts and ghouls dating back to the Revolutionary War. We've got your basics, the hitchhiking ghosts, the haunted tunnels. Hell, we even have a sea monster over in Gloucester. My personal favorite local legend would have to be the shark of the Charles River. That one's got to be the most original. Sure, the Dover Demon is pretty specific to Massachusetts, but what's so special about a little guy with a big head running around the woods? Snore. Pretty much every town has seen its fair share of aliens, but who else has a freshwater great white? In case you're not familiar, let me explain the legend. Now, I've heard of two different explanations, both of them beginning the same way. Way back when they were first setting up the dams and shit to keep the river separate from the ocean/free of salt water, a shark managed to slip in undetected. Once walls were put up it had no way to escape. Some say something happened to the shark. Maybe it mutated, adapted to the fresh water and managed to stay alive all these years. Sightings date back to the 1950s. The second explanation, which probably makes a bit more sense, is that the original shark died a long time ago, but not before giving birth. So if you go by that theory, it would be reasonable to assume that there are actually a few sharks in there. Similar to the other theory, I guess they must have somehow adapted to the freshwater. Now here's the fun part. You hear, shark in the Charles River, and you're like, yeah, okay buddy, go fuck yourself. I've met people from other states, neighboring states even, who swear up and down that they've never heard of this urban legend. Pretty weird, right? But what if I told you there's actually an explanation for that too? I won't lie, it's more rumor than fact. The details are generally a bit hazy. Isn't that usually the case with urban legends? Story has it, the man who reported the initial sighting back in the 50s, Ramon Miralles, was targeted by the city. Upon reporting his sighting to the police, he was arrested for public intoxication. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe not. From then on, police would make frequent, some might say routine, stops at Ramon's house. He lived in a bad neighborhood. How many Latinos were there in Boston in the 1950s? Lots of domestic disturbances. Boston wasn't exactly known for great race relations. Not so surprisingly, it didn't take long for one of these routine checkups to become violent. Nobody really knows who threw the first punch, but it ended up with Ramon being incarcerated for 15 years. The main charges were assault and attempted murder of a police officer. The guy had nothing but his fists, he got clubbed within an inch of his life, and they somehow managed to pin attempted murder on him. Like I said, 1950s, race relations, you get it. The thing is, Ramon didn't blame racism for his incarceration. He blamed his shark sighting. According to Ramon, the initial charge of public intoxication was bogus and he was, in fact, sober. According to Ramon, the cops told him then and there that if he ever tried to go public with his story, bad things would happen. They kept him in a holding cell for a week as a warning. The day they let him out was the day he went to the public news station. The next day there were cops outside his house. His story was never printed. Now, it's entirely possible that Ramon was full of shit. That he was just a rowdy drunk with an overactive imagination. But if he's to be believed, then he spent 15 years in prison because someone didn't want word of this shark to get out. All we can really be sure of is that Ramon never changed a word of his story. Until his death sometime in the early 80s, Ramon insisted that there was a shark in the Charles River and that, furthermore, the city imprisoned him to keep it a secret. Now that's what I call an urban legend. The originality of it all. The whole conspiracy theory as to why it's not a more popular urban legend, oh if I was a chef I would do a little kiss. As far as I'm concerned, there's not a single Western tall tale that beats it. Or, at least that's what I thought. 3 days ago my dad and I took his old canoe out onto the Charles. It's a long river and we weren't actually in Boston. My dad lives in a nearby city called Newton and that's where we started canoeing. It was the first beautiful day out after a week of rain. Sitting on the placid water, slowly gliding past the greenery on the river banks, it was peaceful. A lone goose took a liking to my dad and followed us for a little bit. Every now and then my phone would vibrate and I'd find a new obnoxious selfie my dad had sent me from the back of the boat. Honestly, it was a pretty idyllic little summer day. Then we noticed the goose was gone. My dad asked if I'd noticed it flying away. No, I'm in the front. You were the one on goose duty. We briefly pondered over where it might have gone before my dad said something to the effect of, I guess the shark must have got it. With a chuckle I returned my attention to the water ahead. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. Like I said before, it was peaceful out, but it hadn't been this quiet. It was a tad unnerving. I looked around for any signs of life, but found none. Odd. Typically on a day like this you couldn't throw a stone into the Charles without hitting some sort of waterfowl, but now there was nothing. I looked down the side of the canoe to the surface of the water and found no insects. No gnats hovering just above the water, no dragonflies on the hunt. I took in the dead silence of the river around me as the uneasiness I felt quickly dropped to my stomach and transformed into dread. I turned around in my little seat and looked at my dad. He wasn't rowing anymore. He too seemed to notice the uneasiness in the air, but said nothing. And then something bumped into our boat. I guess that's a bit of an understatement. Something dragged itself across the bottom of our boat. Not a piece of driftwood either. It wasn't something stuck in the water scraping down the middle of our canoe. No, whatever this was had to be at least the size of our canoe. My father and I stared down for what felt like an endless amount of time, watching the floor of our little canoe contort inward against the pressure of whatever was below us. When I worked up enough courage to look over the side of our boat, I saw nothing but the glare of the sun hitting the water. I looked back at my dad, but his gaze was still transfixed on the floor of the canoe. Eventually, the scraping stopped. Whatever rushed us from behind had overtaken us now, and was well on its way. I could feel the relief wash over me as my throat opened up. I hadn't even noticed I wasn't breathing before. Now, this isn't the deep ocean or anything. This is the Charles River. It's not actually supposed to have sharks. It's not supposed to have anything big enough to do whatever just happened. I looked to my dad again and we made eye contact. He's never been much of one to express his feelings, a bit of a brick wall. But I could see in his eyes, he was terrified. I turned around in my seat to look out at the water ahead, see if I could catch a glimpse of whatever lurked beneath. I immediately had to shield my eyes from the glare on the water. Golden hour. Great. But I did see something. Further up ahead, under the shade of an oversized willow tree, was a small patch of crystal clear water, unaffected by the sun's glare. I saw it. I don't know what it was, but god damn it, I saw it. A mass of black, moving just under the surface of the water. I couldn't even make out a real shape to it, but I could tell it was bigger than any shark I've ever seen. My dad saw it too. So, is there a shark in the Charles River? I don't know. I always wanted there to be, but I never really believed it. Now, I have no idea what to believe. Could there be a shark? Maybe. Did I see a shark? Hell no. Like I said, whatever I saw was way bigger than a shark. Big enough to make me feel like more people should know about it. Not to sound like a conspiracy nut, but I'm honestly starting to feel a little suspicious that more people don't know about it. Something so big, you'd have to put in some serious work to keep it a secret, right? Anyway, I guess there's no big climactic ending. I don't even really have all that great a story. I saw a big shadow in the water, big fucking whoop. You don't have to believe it. You just have to read it. Forward it, tell it to people. More people should know about the thing in the Charles River. Second story. I worked as an overnight security guard at a local college. I quit after seeing something in the parking lot. I had just gone through a pretty rough divorce a few months ago. For the brief 2 years my ex and I were married, most of our nights ended up turning into shouting matches and insults. We were always so loud we had gotten several noise complaints and an eventual ultimatum that we could be thrown out of the building. Anyway, we ended the whole thing, and she got the most of everything. The house belonged to her family, along with most of everything in it. She let me only have my clothes, some photos, and my dog, Riley. I was short on money at the time. Luckily, a friend of mine let me stay in his home for as long as I needed. While there, I was looking for a better paying job to help me get my life back on track. My search led me to an opening for a campus security guard at the local community college. I arrived at the interview, to learn that this was a job for the night shift. I wasn't too sure about taking the job at first, but my bills and growing debts weren't going to pay off themselves. Needless to say, I started the next night. The campus itself was a decent size, both in terms of area and the number of students. The core campus includes 14 educational and auxiliary buildings. The security office was by the south entrance of the college, situated on the second floor of the parking garage. The two senior security guards, James and Darnell, walked me through my job description. My task every night was to complete 2 full searches around campus, checking all the buildings and monitoring the security cameras. My shift would start at 9:30 at night and go through 6 o'clock in the morning, by which time I'd take the bus home. The job itself wasn't too bad. I kind of developed a friendship between James and Darnell, since there was a brief period of time our shifts would overlap. By the time they both left, it would be midnight for me, and I'd be alone on campus. It's so surreal how such a place that's bustling and full of students can quickly empty out and turn silent. When my shift starts, there's usually a few cars left in the lot for those who took evening classes. Some instructors and other staff would sometimes work extra late, but those instances were rare. In short, my interaction with other people besides my coworkers was almost non-existent. Sometimes on break or in between circuits, if it stayed quiet on campus, I'd read a book, or listen to spooky stories on my phone. After listening, I would start to feel a little creeped out for being in a campus all alone after dark, but I got used to it. It killed the boredom until I started my next circuit started. I wouldn't find much of anything out of the ordinary, aside from the random object left behind by a student, which I would bring back to the lost and found. I just had to make sure no one else was hanging around after closing. After coming back, I would check the security footage in case I missed something. There were a few screens recording specific spots with the most activity during the day. One for each parking lot, one for each floor in all the buildings, and one for the administrative office. I got decent pay every couple of weeks. After a while, I moved out of my friend's house and got a small apartment and was saving up for a used car. I felt like my luck was starting to turn around finally. Then, I had the scariest experience of my life. I was left alone around midnight like always. The campus was absolutely deserted at this time like normal. It was summer during this time, so the night was pretty warm. I felt like I was building a bit of sweat in my security uniform while doing my first circuit. I came back to the security office, after finding nothing of note, and checked the camera feed. I found nothing in any of the screens until I checked the one for the south lot, near the office. While the screen was small, I could discern the moving of a large shadow across one of the lamp posts. It was doing nothing but moving back and forth across the light. The shadow looked too large to be some small bird or animal. I deduced it had to be someone parked off screen, so I couldn't visibly see them. I went out there to check things out and found nothing there. If it were a person just fucking around, they would have to have left a sign of their presence. There was nothing left behind. I didn't hear a car driving off, or any noise for that matter. I scoped the rest of the south lot to find the source of the shadow. Still nothing. I sighed in annoyance at the thought of some jackass deciding to waste my time. Nothing else happened the rest of the night. I got used to sleeping during the day, but all I could afford to sleep on was a cheap couch that was anything but comfortable. It was rare that I got a full 8 hours of sleep on it, and to top it off, the AC unit had crapped out. My cheap apartment had gotten warmer, making much harder to sleep. I got to the college at the start of my shift with maybe 5.5 hours of sleep. I had coffee, but it only lasted for so long. With it being extremely late, my office feeling cool, and it being quiet everywhere, I started feeling drowsy. Sleeping on the job wasn't allowed, of course, but every now and then I let myself have a brief nap to refresh myself. So I set my head on the desk and fell asleep instantly. I was later jolted awake. A feeling of something very wrong switched my tired mind on alert and woke me up. I rubbed my eyes and checked the monitors to see if anything was up. I looked at the camera feed for the south lot, and my eyes narrowed. Beneath one of the lamp lights, a person was standing. Not doing anything, just being very still. I couldn't make out any details, but this person had long black hair, and looked very tall for almost reaching the light. I looked at the bottom of the screen and found the camera was still recording. Whoever the camera was showing was still there. The feeling that jolted me awake intensified, and I was aware of myself shaking. A chill colder than the air inside the office crept up my neck. My body was reacting to some sort of danger the image was giving off. Still, a weird person on the security footage was not an excuse to not do my job. I got to the lot in under a minute, and I saw that person still standing under the lamplight. Just being dead still. Their back was facing toward me, and their head seemed to be bowed forward. As I approached closer and tried to get their attention, I found that this trespasser was very tall and lanky and was wearing a dirty white dress. I called to her again, asking if she needed help, but didn't respond. She just kept standing like a statue where she was. I reached out to touch her and my hand retracted back from the burning sensation her skin gave off, as if she were on fire. I cursed and shook my hand to cool it off, and the lady moved for the first time. Her head lifted upward, as if finally acknowledging I was there. She turned around, and I started to track backwards. Her body was humanoid, but she had the head of a goat or ram. The fur was pitch black, contrasting against her pale skin and white dress. The eyes were red like burning embers and strands of flesh hung off its curved horns. As my backwards walk sped up, I could hear it give off a deep, thunderous roar. I ran back towards the office, and I swear I could hear the thing sprinting after me. I ran faster than I ever have in my life, and I barricaded myself in the security office. For good measure, I switched off the lights inside, and called 911. I told them something was on campus, and they sent someone over. I hung up and strained my ears to hear any noise outside my office. It was hard to notice anything other than the pounding of my heart working overtime. It felt like an eternity before I heard the knocking at the door. The cops notified their presence, and I slowly opened the door. They questioned me about what I called for. When I told them, they looked at me as if I were a mental patient or a drug user. I played the footage back for them, and there the thing was. At the very least, they weren't going to arrest me for making a fake emergency call, but with the trespasser gone, there wasn't much they could do. They left, and I was once again alone. This time I was very afraid. Not that I was alone, but afraid that I wasn't alone, and that thing was still out there. I wasn't taking any chances. I waited in that office, and kept the door locked until the end of my shift. I left a note saying I resigned immediately, and I never went back. Third story. This story was shared by you/turquoise umbrella. This is how you kill a Wendigo. My twin sister Janessa was murdered at age 16. I witnessed it like a coward from atop a tree in the forest where it happened. I'd actually blacked out the memory for a while. I knew she was dead, but I couldn't remember how it happened. It wasn't until I tried therapy that it slowly came back to me. I was also reminded of how much my parents used to fight. Our family was planning on a camping trip the day before my sister's death. Before leaving, my parents erupted into another massive fight. Janessa and I had been looking forward to the trip, and once again our parents' awful communication skills was ruining it before it even began. We snuck out of the house and took a lift to the forest. We left our phones at home, not caring whether our parents would be worried sick. We enjoyed ourselves the first day. I set up our tent, made a fire, had s'mores, and did all that stuff one typically associated with camping. The next morning everything changed. I woke up alone in our tent. Outside I hear my sister talking to someone. Inquisitive, I opened the tent and saw someone sitting at our now out campfire who looked just like me. The figure transformed as soon as Janessa realized it wasn't me. Together we ran off, that thing rushing after us with heavy steps. I was faster than my sister and a bit more athletic. I grabbed onto a tree branch and climbed up a tree. Janessa was not so lucky. I watched it happen. I watched that thing tear my sister to pieces. I'm still haunted by her screams. I also understand now why she always appears badly mutilated in my nightmares. I stayed up in that tree overnight, my sister's corpse lying in the leaves. Her remaining eye always staring up at me. While in therapy there was a moment when I suddenly recalled the hallucination I had the morning after my sister's death. I thought I saw her corpse clawing at the tree where I hid. She wanted me to come down and join her. It caused me to panic and cry out. A couple of men who had been camping in the area heard my screams, and at last I was rescued. My parents don't argue anymore. I hardly see them at all anymore since my sister's death. We're an upper-middle-class family. Over the last couple of years my parents have frequently gone on vacations. They don't tell me where and I never ask. I usually just wake up and find out they've left yet again. I'm out of high school now and I have no career path yet. I've only really had one thing on my mind since I remembered what killed Janessa. Now I'm returning to the forest where she died. Now I'm going to go after the thing that killed her. I've been preparing for this, and if it is a Wendigo like I've suspected, then I'm more than ready to take my revenge. This is how I'm doing it. I took a lift again. Had the driver known what I was carrying in my bags, I doubt they would have let me in. As I sat there, the realization of what I was doing grew heavily on me. What the hell am I doing? I've been talking myself up for the last couple of years. As much as I want a glorious victory, the closer I've come to this day, the more I daydream about dying the same way Janessa did. As angry as I am with my parents, I don't think they deserve to lose their only remaining child. But I just can't move on knowing that thing is still out there. My legs were as dense as gold once I tried to exit the cab. The driver watched awkwardly as I struggled to pull myself out while putting on my backpack and working to carry the other supplies. Why was I doing this alone? I don't want anyone else getting hurt in this, I think was my reasoning. But God, I wish I wasn't out here doing this alone. With each step I took into the forest, the more the terror numbed. I was in the domain of the Wendigo now. I wasn't entirely sure how much of the information about them was real. I knew they could change their appearance. I know that their true form is just like the drawings people have made. There's no way to be an expert on these things unless you've actually dealt with one. I'm still not sure why it decided not to come after me. Based on its size, I doubt it would have had any difficulty. Instead, I'm still alive and crazy enough to come back and pick a fight. As I set up camp, I found myself jumping at the sound of any bird call or movement from a nearby animal. The way I hammered in my tent, I knew I was calling attention to myself. In my left pants pocket was a gun. Like werewolves, I'd heard that silver bullets were necessary to kill Wendigos. What if I'm wrong? The thought had been with me ever since I'd stepped foot back into these woods. I stopped frequently while setting up. Behind a nearby tree, I was almost certain I could see someone watching me and then hiding behind it again. I didn't bother to walk over and check it out. I finished up my tent and made up my sleeping bag inside. As I did this, I heard calls that sounded almost human off in the distance. It probably knew I was here. The minutes went by slowly, but soon dusk set upon the forest. I built a fire like the one Janessa and I had made. I roasted 2 marshmallows. Despite her absence, I made a s'more for her as well, resting it on a sizable rock near the fire. As I ate it, I thought about our last night together. All things considered, it was pleasant. Being twins, we had moments where we'd gotten into arguments like our parents. We'd fought one another. We had our problems. But that night had been pleasant. I'd actually been glad we decided to camp without our parents. As frightened as I still was, I felt a warmth not from the fire. A sense of calm overcame me as my memories were suddenly flooded with the good times Janessa and I had. The good times were not for long. I could hear footsteps not far behind me. Jeremy. I could never forget that voice. It sounded just like Janessa, but I knew it wasn't her. For some reason I felt compelled to sit there calmly. As it approached, I could tell it was going over to take a seat at the rock where I'd left the s'more. I glanced delicately to my right. I watched as a figure that looked almost identical to the Janessa I remembered pick up the s'more and take a bite. "That's not yours." I surprised myself blurting that out. The fake Janessa ignored me, continuing to scarf it down. My terror turned to anger. The thing responsible for my sister's death was standing right next to me, mocking my grief. I didn't wait for it to finish. I pulled out my gun and pointed it directly at the figure. Before I could fire, the creature jumped to the left and turned around. I was struck with paralysis when I saw the mutilated face of my sister's corpse staring back at me. "I'm trapped, Jeremy." I struggled to keep aim. How dare that thing pretend to be her? It won't let me go. And it won't let you go either. We can be together again. It's so much nicer than going home to an empty house and unloving parents. She held her hand out to me. "Trust me, brother. Please." My trigger finger felt as though struck with a serious case of arthritis. Janessa took a step towards me. "Wait, no. It's not Janessa. Why did I suddenly forget that? Feed the forest with me, Jeremy. It's so much better being dead. Prove it." At last I pulled the trigger. The creature hollered in pain as it fell to the ground. I'd hit a lung, which wouldn't be enough. I aimed the gun at its heart, but failed to pull the trigger as it rolled over and jumped back to its feet. Within seconds it transformed from a corpse of my sister to its massive dark skeletal form with massive antlers. My mind was caught between fight and flight. I stood there aiming my gun but desperately wanted to flee. As it rushed towards me, I chose the later option. I rushed over to the bag I'd left near the tent. Inside was a weapon I'd built myself. As I rushed over, I could tell I wasn't going to be able to outrun it. I fired another shot. The bullet lodged itself inside the neck of the beast. It cried out once more, buying me a bit of time to get to the bag. Why did I have it zipped up? As I tried to open it, the Wendigo rushed towards me again. Just like on the day of Janessa's death, I ran from the campsite, further into the forest. History was repeating itself. I was going to fail to avenge my sister. My parents were going to lose their last remaining child, all because I couldn't let this go. After at least several minutes, I'd somehow managed to keep outrunning it. I refused to slow down and look behind my shoulder. As I kept running, I noticed that I'd gone in some sort of circle. Up ahead of me was the campsite. I had a chance to grab the bag and pulled out the weapon. The closer I came to the campsite, the louder the Wendigo's footsteps became. I could almost feel the wind as the creature tried to claw at me. Once I reached the campsite, I put my hand out, clutching the bag. It felt like almost too great a risk to put my gun back in my pocket, but I needed free to pull out the weapon. I managed to do just that and used my left hand to pull out a long metal spike. I built it in such a way as to have the spike shoot out at the push of a button. The Wendigo wasn't going to slow down until it had me. I had no choice. I had to turn around. I had to have perfect timing. I had to collect my debt from the creature that took my twin sister. Chew on this, you son of a bitch. I turned around, pressing the button that shot the spike out. Less than a foot from my face was the Wendigo, its cries so loud my ears hurt and began to ring. I'd done it. The spike had pierced the heart. Silver. Weakly the Wendigo tried to swipe at me, but somehow lacked the strength. The next part was a gamble. I pulled out my gun and shot it in the head. It wasn't going to be enough to end the Wendigo, assuming what I'd read up was correct. I rushed back over to where I'd dropped my bag. Inside was a silver axe I'd also designed myself. When I returned, the creature was still conscious, letting out continuous agonizing cries. I felt no sympathy. I hacked away at its wrists first. Its claws were the biggest threat and I wanted them gone. Despite the weight lifting I'd been doing, it took over a dozen hacks to remove the first long-fingered hand. I pulled out my gun and shot it again in the head. It subdued the creature long enough for me to remove the second hand, and then I began on its head. As it began waking up again, I found myself screaming at the creature. I demanded it stay dead, calling it every insulting name that came to mind. Once I'd hacked most of the way through its head, I pulled it off. I kicked it a couple of feet away. The Wendigo no longer moved. It took over an hour, but I'd managed to put each limb, the head, and torso in the trash bags I'd brought along. One by one I carried them back to the campsite. I lit another fire, burning each bag. It took until dawn for me to burn the body. I left the torso for last. It was a struggle, but I managed to remove the heart, rip it to pieces, and placed it in a silver box. After locking it, I looked around the site and decided to leave everything except my gun and the box behind. I was never particularly religious, but in the months leading up to my fight I'd gotten to know a priest at a church in my area called St. Alphonsus. Luckily for me, he was there when I arrived with the silver box. His face went several shades paler when I showed it to him. Nevertheless, he escorted me to the back of the church with a pair of shovels and helped me bury it. Once done, I sat there, suddenly flooded with overwhelming emotions. I did it. The Wendigo had been slain. I'd done it. My sister's killer was dead, its body was burned, its heart in pieces and buried. Janessa. I cried out. I kept my promise. I killed it. The Wendigo can't get anyone else. It won't kill anyone else. I placed my lowered head in my hands and continued to cry. I'm sorry I wasn't braver before, I whimpered. I'm so sorry I wasn't stronger before. I placed some flowers on my sister's grave an hour later. I talked to her tombstone as though she was there listening. I'd like to believe she was, and that she was pleased with my accomplishment. Afterwards I returned home and slept through the day and all night. Once morning came, I heard some noise downstairs. I went down to see that my parents were home and sitting down to breakfast. They stopped and looked over at me, saying nothing. I walked over and pulled up a seat. I had no appetite at all. How was your trip? Where did you guys go? My parents exchanged looks before my father replied. We went out west to visit your aunt and uncle. Did you enjoy it? I had difficulty keeping my chin from quivering as I lowered my head again. Jeremy, sweetie, what's wrong? Both my mother and my father got up and came over to me. Why do you keep leaving me alone? God damn it, I'm the only kid you have left. Don't you give a fuck about me? They hugged me tightly, offering apologies. I could have sworn I felt another pair of hands on my shoulders. Their light touch was the most comforting of all. I really hope Janessa is proud of me. But a new task was ahead of me now. A harder task perhaps. I was going to have to figure out how to reconcile with my parents. Our family had been broken long before her death. We'll never be whole again, but I know with some effort we can be better than this. I hope she can continue to give me the strength to put myself together as I progress into adulthood. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/Beardify. Why I stay away from haunted houses. I still remember how the screen door slammed that October evening. My foster father's voice, however, was even louder as he shouted after me. Just where the hell do you boys think you're going? I gestured over my shoulder at my friend Brett's car, idling at the end of the gravel driveway. I was going to a haunted house with some friends from school, I explained over the rumble of the motor. Over my dead body. Frank yelled. Get back up here. I couldn't understand what I'd done to make Frank Liddell so angry. He and my foster Missouri, Pam, were a little rough around the edges, but they weren't the exploiters or religious nut jobs that I'd feared when I was first put into foster care. They'd been nothing but kind to me so far, although the look on my foster father's face suggested that was all about to change. I wasn't scared of Frank Liddell, but I was afraid of what might happen if my new family rejected me. Giving up a haunted house seemed like a small price to pay to avoid the other kind of foster home that I shook my head at Brett. He rolled his eyes and drove off in a cloud of exhaust fumes, taking my hopes of fitting in at my new school with him. From now on, I'd be known as the loser who didn't celebrate Halloween. I dragged my feet on the way back to the porch, but all my irritation disappeared when I saw my foster father up close. He'd fallen, rather than sat, on the rocking chair beside the door. He was watching me with the shell-shocked pale expression of a man who just narrowly avoided a gruesome accident. "You ever been to one of those things before?" he asked. "A haunted house, I mean." I shook my head. That was part of the reason why I was so eager to go. They got all kinds now. Ones with mechanical monsters. Ones where people in masks can jump out and grab you. At some of them, you gotta sign a waiver, saying they're not responsible for whatever they do to you. You really sure you want to go to a place like that? I hadn't thought about it, but I doubted that the local spooky attractions in the small town where the Liddells lived was known for over-the-top horror. In fact, the bright orange flyer I'd found had said that the place was kid-friendly. Frank rambled on. Course, most places just put out those warnings for show. If they ever really did hurt anybody, they'd be out of business overnight, provided that they were ever really in business to begin with. I mean, you never really know for sure who those masked figures are, do you? The ones who you've given permission to come out of the dark, touch you, maybe even drag you off someplace. Sure, it might just be an underpaid actor in a plastic costume. But can you really be sure? I'd heard rumors like that before, campfire stories about serial killers in costumes who snuck into Halloween attractions to hunt their victims. I'd never paid them much attention, but the look on Frank's face made me reconsider. I'm not just talking about a couple psychopaths here. What I want you to think about is this: why do haunted houses exist? I shrugged. I didn't know where this bizarre conversation was going, and at this point, I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. But Frank wasn't done. Don't think I can't see the appeal. Of course, getting scared is sort of fun, if afterwards you walk back out into the sane, ordinary world you left behind. But what if you don't? What if it's the houses that want people to go inside, and not the other way around? I took a deep breath. So my foster father thought that buildings can have personalities. There were worse kinds of crazy to be, I reminded myself, and looked wistfully down the country road where the fumes of Brett's car still lingered. This was my life now, and I'd have to make the best of it. I muttered an apology and moved toward the door, telling myself that I should count my blessings. But Frank's hand wrapped around my wrist like a claw. Look, I'm willing to bet that nothing would have happened if you boys had gone to the haunted house in town tonight. People visit haunted houses all the time, right? Nothing happens to them, well, most of them. But if it did, would anyone notice the pattern? Think about it. If a cop or university professor suggested researching haunted house disappearances, they'd be laughed out of a job. So people look away, and it keeps happening. Frank drank a swig of water like a man throwing back a shot, and for the first time I wondered whether the water that he always carried with him was really a substitute for a different sort of bottle. Halloween wasn't always the big flashy holiday that it is today. When I was your age, we had a few hay bales and pumpkins in front of the town hall, some cardboard witches in the windows of the elementary school, and that was about it. If you wanted something fancy like a rubber mask or a costume party, you had to go to the big city. Frank sighed. I shouldn't have yelled at you. But when I saw your buddy pull up in his car, I thought back to the Halloween night when my two best friends and I took that drive, and went to our first haunted house. Cassie and Tyler didn't have many friends. I didn't either. That might have been the only thing the three of us had in common, but it was enough. See, Cassie's dad never did nothing but drink and cause trouble, and most folks figured that the apple didn't fall from the tree. Tyler, on the other hand, Frank blushed. Well, the only thing people had against him was that the color of his mama's skin was different from his daddy's. The two of them had been dating for years, which is about as serious as it gets in high school when they adopted me into the little group. I dunno why. Hell, maybe they were just bored. Either way, with Tyler and Cassie I finally started doing the sort of things I'd always imagined teenagers did, smoking in the park, walking down railroad tracks, swimming in the river in summer, and having plans for Halloween night. That's the worst part, the part that still stings. The haunted house was my idea. We had it all planned out. Tyler's mom was the editor for some magazine, and a grateful author had sent her some expensive liquor as a thank you gift. Tyler would steal the bottle and give it to Cassie, who would leave it out for her dad after school. By 6 p.m. he'd be blackout drunk, and Cassie would snatch his keys and pick us up on the way out of town. We'd go to the city, where we'd trick or treat like little kids, visit a haunted house, try to sneak into some college parties. With the full moon rising and that fall wind in our hair, it felt like anything could happen. We had it all planned out. Frank repeated, and shook his head. After buying some silly discount masks and gorging ourselves on candy bars from the rich neighborhoods, we headed for the haunted house. We hadn't kept track of time, and Cassie was afraid we wouldn't get there before close, not to mention the line. None of us were used to the city, and just finding a place to park among all those cars was a nightmare. It felt like the house, with its creepy lighting effects and soundtrack of evil laughter, was teasing us. Cassie left the car in front of a fire hydrant and we took off down the sidewalk, hoping we weren't too late. The ticket guy was a kid our age in zombie face paint and an oversized pinstripe purple suit. He told us that the house closed at half an hour before midnight, and we were 3 minutes too late. All he wanted to do was finish cleaning up and go home, but I guess the look on our faces made him change his mind. He sighed, took our money, and pulled back the red velvet rope in front of the front porch stairs. The place had probably been some rich farmer's estate, once. Now it was gray, gaunt, and rickety. There was something hungry about the way it loomed over us as we walked inside. The double doors creaked open automatically, a nice touch, I thought, and we stepped into a hallway lit only by creepy blue bulbs. Tyler made a joke about what shows up in blacklight. We all jumped a little and laughed when the doors slammed shut behind us. It must have been a pretty fancy house in its day, but the hallway Tyler, Cassie and I walked down was bare except for plastic skeletons and fake cobwebs. It had a sad, barren look to it, like whoever had set up the haunted house didn't have the budget to decorate it the way that it deserved. Halloween-themed songs played from a speaker somewhere, and candles flickered in a couple jack-o'-lanterns, but that was about it. The three of us were pretty disappointed. We'd expected movie-quality effects, not cheap junk that we could have bought at the dollar store back in town. We'd almost reached the staircase at the far end of the hallway when a laughing woman with a rope around her neck fell from the ceiling. The rope brought her to a halt just above our heads, and we all screamed. Up close, it was clear that we were just looking at a mannequin dressed up like a witch, but that wasn't what had startled me. See, I would have sworn that what I saw was Cassie, eyeless and bone-thin, like she'd been falling so long she'd starved to death. Tyler gave the mannequin a shove and chuckled as it swung on its rope. Cassie shushed him. It didn't seem right, disturbing the silence like that. The echoes were all distorted, like the hallway was somehow bigger than it looked. I put my foot on the first step of the staircase and everything went black. Suddenly I was falling, not down these steps but different ones, stairs so steep I could feel the wind around me as I tumbled through the dark. When I looked up, Cassie had caught me. There were no twisted stairs here, just the dim lobby of a cheap haunted house. I told the other two that I'd race them to the second floor. We were panting by the time we got to the top, even though it couldn't have taken that long. The theme up there was classic monsters, a mummy that popped out of a broom closet, rubber bats bouncing from the ceiling, a mechanical zombie that sat up from its coffin as we passed by. Nothing scary enough to even make us look twice, nothing like what had happened to me on those stairs. An arrow painted in fake blood directed us to a door on the left, and Tyler yanked the door open impatiently. We were bored already, eager to be done with this and worried about the car, but what we saw behind that door stopped us in our tracks. It was just an ordinary living room. No decorations, no cheesy themes. Just a gramophone, some armchairs, a ticking wall clock in the shape of a cat with big eyes that swung from side to side. It was a near-perfect replica of how most of people lived almost a century ago, except that it looked brand new. There was even a cigar burning in an ashtray and a half-finished glass of brandy, like whoever was living here would be back any minute. It felt obscene, like we were invading somebody's privacy, and trespassing somewhere we shouldn't. I was about to suggest that we turn back when the door slammed and locked behind us. I knew we had to cross that eerie room to leave it, but even so, it was hard to take that first step. The tiny pink flowers on the hideous wallpaper seemed to squirm like tiny fingers, and I had an awful feeling that we were being watched from the far corner of the room. Suddenly, the gramophone started playing by itself, but the noise coming out of it wasn't music. It was us. Tyler and Cassie and I, screaming, arguing, shouting in terror about bruises and grabbing hands. We'd never spoken those words in our lives. The three of us looked at each other and all had the same thought: get out of here as quickly as possible. The gramophone kept getting louder and louder. I thought my ears would bleed before we got to the door on the other side of the room, but once we were through it, the noise stopped completely, and all the lights went out. We closed the door behind us and leaned against it, too scared to talk. Tyler started to say something about how maybe it was all part of the act, but the words died in his throat, especially after he looked around at where we were. It was a dim, dirty kitchen. If the room we'd left had been something out of the last century, this one was all 1970s, dark wood cupboards, pea-green walls, puke yellow linoleum. The only thing the two had in common was the inescapable, lingering feeling that we weren't supposed to be there, like something was leading us into its trap. Hunting us. Once, when I was a kid, the basketball I was playing with rolled under a neighbor's porch. I crawled in after it without thinking, and as I was feeling around in the dank, cobwebby dark, something growled behind me. I never found out what it was: a stray dog, a mountain lion, or maybe even just a rabid raccoon, but I never felt that kind of fear again until I stepped into that nasty little kitchen, like I'd gotten myself trapped in a cramped place with something hungry and horrible. There were no windows and only one door. We had no choice but to keep going deeper into the house, if that's what it was. There was something wrong about the air in there. It seemed to be moving, and it wasn't until we approached the dripping faucet that I realized what it was. The air was buzzing with thousands of tiny flies. Cassie clamped a hand over her mouth and leaned over the sink to see what they were coming from, then she groaned and bolted for the door. Tyler followed her, slipping in a puddle of something rust-colored and sticky that was coming from the fridge, and I followed. Our footsteps had woken the place up somehow. There was a bang from inside the cabinets, then another, so hard that they shook, and I realized that I absolutely could not handle seeing whatever was about to come out of there. We shoved each other through the door just in time, and felt the slam when something crashed into it behind us. More came, hard enough to rattle the door on its hinges, but it held. We were in what looked like a children's nursery. Bright, wide-smiling zoo animals painted on the walls. Small bed topped with plain white sheets. A nightlight in the shape of a grinning plastic moon. It was dead silent, like the room was waiting for us. Then, all at once, four almost human shapes sat up beneath the covers. We froze, too scared to move, then something reached out from beneath the bed and tried to pull me under. I yelped in pain, kicked it off, and ran. Once the door was pressed shut behind us, I rolled up the cuff of my jeans and found a burn mark in the shape of a tiny hand with too many fingers. It was still painfully cold to the touch. Cassie started yelling, demanding to be let out, shouting that we'd never agreed to let anyone touch us, but she stopped mid-sentence. It was the same argument that we'd heard on the gramophone when we first walked into this nightmare. The realization shocked us into silence, and we finally began to take in our surroundings. We were in another hallway, but this one didn't have an end. The ugly yellow wallpaper and old-fashioned doors went on forever in both directions. Just looking at it made me want to grab onto the floor, like at any minute the hallway would tilt and I'd slide down the carpet into the abyss. I was still trying to get my head around it when the doorknob of the room we'd left began to turn. There was rustling on the other side, fingers feeling around the gaps and hinges. Tyler started pulling on one doorknob after another, but they were all locked. At the pace he was moving, we struggled to keep up with him. He started knocking instead, swearing that he could hear movement and voices on the other side of the doors. He yelled and pleaded, begging to be let in. Then, when Cassie and I were too far away to help him, he got his wish. The door in front of Tyler swung open, and I saw the terror on his face for just a split second before he was sucked inside. The door shut and locked itself behind him, but Cassie and I weren't going to let that stop us. I kicked the door until my foot went through it, and then I howled in pain. There was nothing but a wall on the other side. It was like the house had swallowed Tyler up. Even worse, we had no idea where we were, the doors were all identical, and none of us had thought to mark the point that we'd started from. Cassie just shut down, holding her head in her hands and muttering about how this couldn't be happening. I remember thinking that at this rate, it wouldn't be long before both of us went crazy, and maybe that was the point. Then I heard hinges creaking. By the time I spun around, the door was wide open. There was nothing but darkness on the other side, at least that's what I thought at first. Once I got closer, though, I saw the stairs. Narrow, uneven, with a plunge into the blackness on either side, and no guardrail. I ever mention that I'm scared of heights? I couldn't do it. I told Cassie that I'd starve to death in the endless hallway before I'd make myself climb down there, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. Through a mix of pleading, insults, and holding my hand, she finally got me moving, even though I had to crawl backwards to do it. Those steep, jagged stairs were made of something slick and cold as ice. A black wind blew around us as we crawled downwards. It felt like being on the edge of a mountain peak, even though I knew that was impossible. We were still indoors, weren't we? Or maybe, on the other hand, we hadn't been in that cheap haunted house for a long time, just maybe, we'd been swallowed by someplace else. Before long, the stairs were so tall and narrow that it was almost like being on a ladder above empty space. I was so tense that I started shaking, and I guess it's no surprise that I slipped. I slid downward, unable to grip the narrow steps and knowing that at any second I might fall into the nothingness on either side, but Cassie caught me. It happened exactly as I'd envisioned it earlier that night, just like the yelling that we'd heard on the gramophone. So what about the mannequin, the one that had looked like Cassie, long dead and falling through empty space? Clinging to the almost vertical steps, I shouted my friend's name even though I knew that it was already too late. By grabbing me, she'd unbalanced herself and gone over the edge. She probably didn't even have time to scream. Cassie had been so sure that the stairs were our way out, but what if they had been a trap all along? After all, we hadn't opened the door to the darkness, the house had. I climbed back up the stairs as quickly as I dared, and found the hallway above exactly as I'd left it. Well, not exactly. There was an end to it on either side, and there were sounds, cars driving by outside, the hum of a heating system, and the teenager who'd taken our tickets yelling about how I wasn't supposed to be back there, and anyway, the haunted house was closed. Of course, I filed a police report, a lot of good that did. When I told them what had happened, they decided my friends and I were junkies on a bad trip. Later, they kicked around the idea that we were in some kind of satanic cult and that I'd killed them myself. In the end, I guess they just decided that the whole thing was too complicated and strange to bother with. Tyler's family moved away without a word to anyone, and Cassie's dad drank himself to death before Christmas. The neighbors said that at night he would scream out her name, like he didn't know she was gone. I stayed where I was and did my best to forget about the whole thing. As you can see, it hasn't worked out. The sun had set while Frank had told me his story, and in the twilight gloom he looked almost like a ghost himself. I didn't know what to say. I mumbled something about how it was getting cold on the porch, and headed for the screen door. "I'm not asking you to believe everything you hear," Frank smiled. "Just promise me that, as long as you live under my roof, you'll stay away from haunted houses." I nodded, and Frank pulled himself up from his rocking chair to follow me inside for supper. That's when I noticed the scar on his ankle, a scar in the shape of a small, six-fingered hand. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/Northcoast10. I think I encountered a Wendigo. My wife and I have been running the rat race for years, with a family, a house in the city, 2 dogs, a cat, the stereotypical American dream. But the city took its toll, the neighborhood got worse, the crime rose, and we found ourselves looking for a way out. Our opportunity came when I was offered a new job out of state. It was a great career move, but we didn't want to move to a new city just to have the same problems again. So we started looking around and found a great mountain community about an hour and a half from the job, and a great ranch-style house with a big back porch, windows everywhere, and a lot of property. The backyard has a big grassy area, and a creek that cuts the property in half, then acres of woods beyond. It's huge. The house is more than twice the size of our house in the city, it's all updated, and has no neighbors within a mile. It's a radical change from the life we lived in the city, but best of all, it was less than half of what we were paying for our old house. The house was a foreclosure, and when we asked the listing agent about it, she simply said the old family had abandoned the property. We really didn't think anything of it. The first 3 months were uneventful, with us settling into our new life, the kids getting used to the new school and new friends, and most of all, us getting used to the big house and property. But then the weather turned cold and things started to get weird on the property. It started with noises from the back property. Things we chalked up to being in the woods, then the motion lights around the house started going off randomly. Once again we just chalked it up to being in the woods. But last night, it all changed. Last night was the most terrifying night of my life. One of the dogs was at the back door whining and scratching. I assumed he needed to go to the bathroom, so I grabbed my flashlight and walked out the back door. Instantly something felt off. The dog bolted for the back property, growling and snarling. It was a cold night, about 30 degrees, but the dog plunged straight into the creek and out the other bank, running off into the woods in the back of the property. Flashlight bouncing, I ran after him, calling his name. I got to the creek and made my way across the makeshift bridge, trying desperately to follow him. I could hear the dog still growling and barking from somewhere up ahead, and I pushed further away from the safety of the house and deeper into the woods. That's when I heard it. A shriek like I've never heard before in my life. It was a mix of a moaning wail and metal on metal. It echoed through the trees and then froze me in my tracks. My dog bounded its way back to me and cowered down behind me. I turned around and could just make out the warm glow of the house behind me, and the cold dark ahead of me. I swung my flashlight around wildly looking for the source of the noise. And that's when I heard an even more terrifying noise. Out of the cold silence, my wife's voice floated all around me. "Babe," the voice called out. I whipped back around and could just barely make out the image of my wife, safely inside our house. The voice called out again. "Babe, I'm right here," came the voice from deeper into the woods. Then came another voice, just as clear as the other. It was my dad's voice. "Come out here," it called. I swung the flashlight around again and this time caught the briefest glint of light bouncing off of eyes. The creature was in my beam of light for barely a second, but it was tall, maybe 6 feet, and ashen white. It had long spindly fingers that grasped the trunk of a pine tree, and then it was gone. I turned back and ran towards the house. I ran headlong into the icy creek and stumbled. My dog ran past me, making it back to the yard and up to the porch. I dug my hands into the freezing, muddy bank and pulled myself out, not stopping to look back. When I reached the porch, I scrambled inside. My wife ran over to me, asking what had happened. I just shook my head. I'm not certain myself what happened. I had a growing sense of dread tonight as the sun began to fall. We kept the dogs inside, and I haven't dared to look out the back. But as I sit here typing, one by one, my motion lights in the backyard keep going on. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.